I'd like to introduce, please, Alan Hewitt for our next session.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My topic that I was given, it was very interesting when I was asked to come and speak here. I was given this as a suggested title. I'm being quite lazy. I just accepted it from Kevin, which then forces you to go through a thought process of what would you actually like to say to this. So SFIA is a tool to support good HR decisions. And I will explain who the hell I am as well on a coming slide. But I just want to start on this one sentence. You will see when I go through very briefly what I did in my career up to date. This may be the end of my career if this goes really badly. Talking about HR decisions, and I'm not talking about the HR function, personnel function in organisation. I'm talking about what we do with human resources. And I presented at other conferences and done work as a consultant with companies talking about treating people as carbon-based life forms from Star Trek, the people who've looked at that, and as human beings. And I think we need to do both things, and I'm going to try and articulate that a little bit more. Really at the hub of what I'd like to talk to you about this morning is about the need within this whole area of establishing a common language and a common currency. And I'll try and explain what I mean by this, and I'll try and give you some examples. So, I had 30 years in IBM, so that explains the background. What I've tried to do is pick out some of the things that I think may be relevant to what I'm going to talk about today. So I ended up as a partner in their consulting business, the global leader for workforce transformation, because this isn't just an IT problem, although IT is mainly my background. This is, what am I going to do with people in my organisation? I was the head of the IT architect profession in IBM, and I would never have really considered myself to be a leading architect, but I probably was somebody stupid enough to be prepared to take on the role of the architect lead. What it did teach me was, how do you grow and develop architects? What do you do? Have I got enough of them? As a community, how do I work together with them? I was the chair of, at the time, the IET, Professional Development Strategy Board, looking at, from the IE's perspective, from IT, how do we actually start to develop people, establish an IT career? Probably the most relevant is this competency exec for the consulting business across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, looking at skills and capability. So this was about 20,000 people across those different countries. What I think is revealing and probably most relevant to you is, to my knowledge, IBM was on its fourth skills system by then, and each of them had failed horribly, probably for two reasons. One, I think they were built by engineers who constantly kept over-engineering the number of skills. And we used to get up to something like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 skills, then we'd go through a culling process, and you suddenly realize that this was costing a fortune, but no one actually used it. It wasn't being used productively. And I think this changed for me in IBM when, for the first time, we saw, as a result of somebody doing their skills assessment, somebody using that information for the number of people they required, what skills they required, and what education we were going to put in place. I left IBM in 2010, and since then have worked with a media company that may have just moved to Salford, a charity looking at restructuring their organisation, and more recently a medical organisation that is currently in some turmoil as they may be seeking to go for industrial action for the first time for a long time. The relevance of that was, most of what I want to talk to you about today is not from an academic, theoretical perspective. It's from my experience on the ground. And I will say up front, I don't know whether that's the right answer. I'm going to give you an example. Interestingly, what I've learned is it doesn't actually matter which approach you adopt or how complex or simple you want to make it. I would strongly advocate you make things as simple as possible. What is important is that whatever you put in, you actually execute consistently. So whether it was a performance management system, a skills, I seem to have seen too many companies who go through a very expensive skills assessment program and it never happens again. So it was beautifully documented and then no one actually did anything with it. And I'm a strong advocate for not doing that, so keep it simple. So let's look at the basic problem. As I said, I will try and keep this simple. We have organizations. It has lots of people. From my experience, a couple of the companies I work for couldn't actually tell you how many people work for them. So their HR system, their payroll system, doesn't actually give you a 100% accurate picture. Why do I mention that? Because actually getting to grips with what capability I have is quite a challenging picture. It's hard enough if I just look at the IT function, but if I extend that into a business change now, because actually I'm looking to develop business outcomes for my organization, I need to look more holistically at people. And probably most critically, what do I actually want these people to do? And I'm going to try and cover that in a little bit more detail. So what are the questions that we need to ask? Is how much work do I have now? That begs the question, how do I think about work? How do I characterize work? So I'm going to lead the audience a little bit here. Wouldn't it be useful if I at least had a consistent measure of how I looked at work or how I thought about work? How long will that work take? How much work will I have tomorrow? So in lots of IT shops, we're going to come back to this point. I was talking to Ron this morning. From my experience, I have projects that are on the go now. I know what I need, roughly. I need these people now. In 3 months' time, I've got the next tranche of projects coming, and they're probably going to be about this size or that complexity. And then a year's time, I've probably got a project, and it's probably in millions, hundreds of thousands of pounds terms. It isn't consistent. And yet, if I don't have that level of understanding, how do I start to plan what resources I need? And again, wouldn't it be useful if we could use one simple language and one currency to start to identify what resources we need? This last point as well, is the amount of work growing or shrinking? I'm going to come back to talk very briefly about resource strategy. Strategically, is the amount of work going to increase, or am I going to outsource some of this? Am I going to go to SaaS, software as a service? Which means I need probably less resources or different resources in-house because I'm going to give this to somebody else. So I've seen lots of organizations make quite big strategic moves and then be left with a workforce that maybe doesn't match the needs of the business going forward. So having a strategic view, I think, would be quite useful. I alluded to this fact, how many people have I actually got? And not all of them will sit within IT. So when I look at things like business analysis, I could probably measure the number of people inside the IT function that have got business analysis capability, but I probably got double that number sitting out there in the business doing those things. So could I actually start to have one common simple framework so that I could identify those people and hopefully point them at the work that I actually want them to do? So how many people do I need to do the work today, to do the work tomorrow, and to do the work in 6 months' time? Because I'm hoping in a good, vibrant environment, I'm going to be load balancing this all of the time. I actually want to keep moving those people around, and because I'm coming from a services background, I worked with lots of companies of how do I get more of a services thinking that I'm constantly deploying people onto new pieces of work. To do that, I need to understand very clearly what capability they've got and how I would like to use them. So where do I need them to work? Which project? Have I got an organization that is very stovepipe so that they work just in this group on these projects, and if the workload drops, then they become idle, where somebody over here is overworked? Or do I want to move to a point where I can move people around on different projects? And again, talking to Ron this morning, he was talking about different companies that have gone to this resource pool idea so that I can optimize the resources that I've got. And again, even more important is to very clearly understand what capability they've got and what they will need in the future. So where do I need them? When do I need them? And what skills have they got today? Again, I'm going to suggest to you, wouldn't it make sense if we actually had a common point of reference that everybody used? This is not just the people who do the planning. Wouldn't it be sensible if the project manager, when he was thinking about putting his or her team together for their next project, used the same language? Wouldn't it be sensible if when we went to do recruitment, we used the same language? When you outsource part of your business, that you were actually talking the same language to people? I'm going to come back and give you one example, my own personal example, where that miscommunication, we were certainly both speaking English, or at least I think I was, but we actually were a million miles apart on what we meant by what we were saying. And what skills do they need to have? Again, I've seen lots of examples where we've done a skills assessment and we've derived a gap analysis. And I've asked people, what were you actually assessing that gap against? And what they had was an idealistic view that if a project manager is assessed as a level 2, then I really need to get them to a level 3 or 4. and I asked them if they had work to justify a project manager at a level 4, and they didn't know because that was somebody else's department. So I had an L&D group that were trying to just raise the skill level of everybody, regardless of whether they had the work. And again, if we think that one through, so I've now got trained up a project manager at level 4. I've only got level 3 projects. So I'm now either paying too much money for somebody who is overskilled, or they're now bored with the level of work they've got, so why would they stay in the organization? So we need to get these things joined together. You will notice yet again, Ron put up his wheel or process or cycle. This is my one. I will say again, it doesn't actually matter what this is. This is how my brain works through these things, and I'll quickly take you through this. What is important to me is that we keep this as simple as possible and you actually execute it. So the arrow means that it needs to be joined up. Again, I think that needs a common language, a common currency that will actually work across all areas of here. But if you don't execute these things and we do these things in isolation, we will probably not optimize the resources that we have on the ground. So let's start with resource strategy. So lots of examples, as I said. You've got software as a service. You've got the phases that we go through outsourcing. It's been really interesting with outsourcing. I've seen outsourcing examples where whole chunks of work have gone to India. We were talking this morning. India is now outsourcing to China. I've just seen that China is outsourcing to Latin America. And certainly before I left IBM and many others were looking at Central Africa as being the next location for the lowest cost economy where we're going to move things to. So if that's a process and a strategy for your company, what skills do you need to manage an outsourced environment? And I saw lots of people really say, well, that will go to somebody else and that's fine, and they'll do that bit and we'll do this bit, not recognizing you need a whole new set of skills and capabilities in your organization to manage something that is outsourced in a different culture in a different time zone. One of the other interesting byproducts of that is if I outsource all of my application development or the lower level skill jobs, what do I do for growing and developing the people in my own organization that I want? Because traditionally I brought more junior people in. They went through this whole process, whether it was systems management or whether it was application development, to get that early step into IT. They built on that and took on more senior roles. If I've just outsourced that, what am I going to do now? Or am I, as a result of that strategy, now reliant on going out into the marketplace to buy those capabilities in? So I just need to think about these things. And as I say, my strong recommendation is when, as a resource strategy, I've decided that I want this stuff to go to India, and I'm not picking on India, it's an example, I need to understand what are the skills to actually manage something that is being operated in a different geography, in a different time zone. It is critical. It really is. Also in the resource strategy, it would be useful to understand that as a corporation, we're going to move from SAP to Oracle, that we're going to change technologies, that we want to implement an enterprise architecture. I was talking again this morning, lots of organizations that spend a lot of money on enterprise architecture but never actually execute it because they can't get the right skills in their enterprise architects to actually get an influence and move those things into the mainstream. I then have a resource plan. So that assumes that I understand what workload. One of the companies that I work with BP, I'll give you the 3 examples of where I've worked with SFIA. One was BP. BP is an interesting one because this was the first time I'd worked with SFIA with an organization in both the UK and the US. So we were doing the same thing with SFIA on both sides of the Atlantic. The reason for mentioning BP is that we went through and did the skills assessment. I then wanted to do the gap analysis, so I wanted to quantify what their business requirement was. And they said, no, we're going to do that in a year's time, but I need a gap analysis now. And this is where it really brought home to me, how can I do a gap analysis if I don't know what you want? Even if it's a wet finger in the air, give me something of what you think you're going to need. When I talk about a resource plan, look at those projects a year down the road and find some way, using a common language and currency, to quantify what you think it's going to be. Ron was saying that where he worked, there were kind of rules of thumb for a project of this size and complexity would be this number of architects, it would be a senior project manager, it might be a project office, it would be so many coders. At least have something that stops you having a resource plan which just says, I need 200 people now, I need about another 50 then, and I've got $1 million worth of project on the stocks, and that's my resource plan. It isn't helpful, and it's very hard to look a year out and start to put some numbers around it. But again, have a very simple way of looking at that you can refine over time. If we look at the capacity plan, so I now have a rough view of what I actually think I'm going to need. Sequence, so this is a rolling 12-month plan. What do I actually have? And I've seen people use SFIA and just get everybody to assess themselves against every skill in SFIA. And I've been talking to Ron. I talked to the SFIA Foundation. I would like to see a SFIA Lite. So this is my plug, Ron. Because I think we need a scaled-down version of this to just get people started. I don't believe we should use all of SFIA. It is there. It will cover the whole ground. How do we just make this simpler and start with half a dozen skills, a dozen skills that really map in to what we want to do as a business? So again, what is the capacity plan? Do I just want to look in my IT function? Do I want to spread that a little bit more into what capability have I got in the business? My recommendation is you start in IT using a common, simple framework, and we extend it. This source by build. As a resource strategy, I'd like to have made the decision that I can see peaks and troughs in my business and the amount of resource I need. Strategically, I'm going to resource up in-house to the troughs, and then I would like to actually outsource or go out into the marketplace and contract the resources to plug those gaps. Wouldn't it be really good if we could have a language that all of my contract agencies and suppliers use, so that when I asked for something, it was in a common language or a common framework? Again, deployment, I want to be able to deploy people onto work based on the same language. In some organizations, this is the same person who did all of the planning. One point I would make, if I'm dealing with a massive bank, Deutsche Bank and NatWest, RBS, with thousands of people, they have central functions to do this. In a very small SME, this is probably one person and a dog who actually is having to still think about all of these things. They know they've got to make a major shift to the new version of Office from Microsoft. What does it involve? What skills do I need? Have I got them in-house? Do I contract somebody else to do that? How do I do that without impacting the business and get the flow? The thought process is exactly the same. And finally, measure. So I thought this is what I was going to do. This is what I thought the skills were required. How do I get some feedback mechanism that tells me whether I actually got this right? Again, I would suggest using a common language. If not, I start to get miscommunication. So, do I have a resource strategy? Do I understand what I'm going to need against that, so that I don't start having L&D, building capability, because strategically I decided I'm going to move from this technology or I'm going to outsource that, so stop building those skills? It would be quite nice if I found out, and I found one organization that made a strategic decision that it would always contract its most senior project managers and program managers. It was a really interesting thing to do, because what it said to all the people in-house is, you've just put a ceiling in, because I'm never going to take on those roles. You're always going to look outside. So I don't think they quite thought through the implications of that. So I think this is about a common language and a common currency. I said I would give you my example. So at the time that I was the IT architect lead in IBM, we acquired Lotus Software, and they had a massive development shop in Dublin. And as the head of the IT architect profession, in IBM in the UK, we had about 300 people who considered themselves architects. And I was invited to go and talk to their architects in Dublin. And I said how many people would be there, and they said just over 1,000, which I thought was interesting. So I thought, that's great. We've now grown to 1,300 architects. When I got there, even though we both called them architects, what they actually meant was they were an architect in a subdivision of Lotus Notes. So in IBM terms, they were a technical specialist, very highly skilled, very professional people, but we didn't mean the same thing. So I called it architect, and that was a holistic view of people who architected total solutions. An architect for them was somebody down in the guts of Lotus Notes. Now, that didn't devalue one role or the other. What it said to me was, we're using the same language, but we're not using it in the same way. We're not quantifying things in quite the same way. And it really brought home to me that maybe we need a simple frame of reference so that we can all talk in the same way. so that when a project manager wants to take a junior project manager or a program office and an architect, they need some way of describing that somebody else has already been looking at building that capability and is planning in the right way for it. So, I'd like to take you through just very quickly how I've looked at that problem. And again, I'm not saying this is the answer. I'm just saying I think we need one, and this is how I approached it. So at 3 places, one, Pete Leather here, worked with Pete at Norwich Union, where we started to use the SFIA. This was version 3 at the time. BP, and one I can't tell you the name, but it's a German international bank. Have all used the same structure, and it's been evolving and developing. So where we started was to look at the technical and functional skills based on the SFIA framework. And the reason it's drawn like this is very specifically. If we think that going bottom to top is probably the amount of experience, so most experience up here, least experience down here, is if I look at the roles of IT professionals in the organization, probably the most in-depth knowledge, the breadth of knowledge here is in the earlier days where you're actually taking in vast quantities of technical information. As you grow and develop, the actual amount of new technical information that you take on, so we could say the volume in here, you have a wealth of knowledge and technical experience behind you now, but your role is actually, as you become more senior, less and less technical, but it is exploiting your knowledge and experience. So if we can accept that, and SFIA, to my mind, is absolutely the perfect language to do that. I haven't seen anything better. The reason I told you about the 4,000, 5,000 skills in IBM is they were so many and so granular that no one used them. And we fought very hard when we looked at version 5 of SFIA to make sure that we don't keep expanding and expanding and expanding these skills. It's got to be kept at an absolute minimum and make them relevant to people. Because if they're not relevant, I won't use it, and I'm going through an academic exercise when I get people to do a skills assessment. So if this starts to quantify the technical skills, I need to add in there the competency and leadership. So my background, IT architect. IT architects tend to have come up through quite a technical background, but as they get to more senior roles, and interestingly from my experience in IBM, the limiting factor for how far an IT architect could go was not on this side of the house. My story about enterprise architects, I have yet to meet one of them that is limited on this side. Where they are limited is on this side. So as an architect, if you think about it, you understand technically how this system hangs together, how you want to pull it together, but now what you've got to do is to engage with the business. You've actually got to make sure you clearly understand their requirements. You've probably got to persuade the business to do something that they didn't really want to do. You've got to explain to the business why having a system that is 24/7 availability, 100% secure, is going to cost you an arm and a leg. And if you could actually give me 1 hour maintenance time for the system a week, I could halve the cost of the system. Now, you need to do that without going into bits and bytes and machine code. You've got to do it in a language that people understand. So from my experience, this bit about your ability to lead, to influence, to communicate became more important than some of this. Your credibility and your technical understanding and background of what works, what doesn't work, how a system should hang together, actually bringing that into reality is the part that's now, I need this side of it. So I'm starting to build one picture, and I'm going to show you my own categorization of how I break this down even more. But this, to me, was the fundamental building block of anyone that you now have in your organization. They have a combination of their technical and functional skills, and I marry into that their competency and leadership skills, and I still firmly believe that it's this side that will limit someone's ultimate career progression, or where they have strength here and maybe some weaknesses here, why we need to value those technical skills and maybe not move them into management roles because that's the only career option open to them. So we've seen lots of people, very technically good, have their careers decimated by being driven because it's the only way they could get promoted into a management role where they were really not suited for it. So if that is the base building block, I need to add some other attributes, and then I will start to build something that I will tell you I believe is a common currency. And I mentioned an architect. This could be a project manager. What I need to add to that is, so tell me a little bit more about you. So you're a very good architect and you've got good competency and leadership skills. But what business area are you in? Is there an industry flavor to this? Is there a solution flavor to this? Are you in retail? Is it point of sale systems? Are you looking at warehouse type systems? That's quite useful to me. So now I can build up this picture. So you're a project manager or you're a coder, and that's where your background is. Then what technologies do you actually have? What knowledge and experience do you have in those? Because again, strategically, as a company, I may be moving in those directions. And let me complete the picture. I've got product. And what I would suggest to you is, and I say, this is not the only answer, this was my answer that we came up with. If I had these component parts and I made sure that I kept quantification of each of these elements as simple as possible, I can start to describe this carbon-based life form that I have in my organization, or probably somebody of where the gaps are. Because if I look from a learning and development perspective, probably the fastest I can train people up is I can give them new products because they're on the back of, they already understand the technology, what's the new product, what's the differences. Technology and business solutions is probably years to build up real capability and competency in that area. And what we were trying to stop in the organizations that I certainly work with was people calling themselves something like a SAP architect or an Oracle coder. And why did I want to stop that? I wanted people to codify themselves on this side and then add the other attributes, because if I as an organization said, yeah, I know you're a SAP architect, but by the way, I'm actually going to move on to Oracle, or I'm going to outsource that and I want you to do something else, I'd like that individual to think of themselves as an architect and the fact that they are prepared to go on the journey which just says we're changing these areas and we're going to move supplier. But the fundamentals of architecture, the fundamentals of how I structure coding, the fundamentals of how I do program or project management are less linked to this side than the core here. Now, it gives me more flexibility. I'm looking at a culture change in some of the organizations to achieve that. What it also does is to give me a unit of measurement that actually makes it easier for me to think about what resources I want. And I'll own it now, when we did the skills assessment, both in the US and the UK, based on SFIA with BP, people's big argument was, far too simplistic. You don't understand. I've been in this industry 15 years, and I'm an excellent project manager, and I'm a great architect, and I've done some coding, and I've done business analysis. I had spent a lot of time with BP and the professionals trying to explain we need to start somewhere. So if I had to split you down the middle, what will you say you are 51%? Because we will pick these other things up later. If I really wanted to start simple, would you now say you are mainly an architect, project manager? If I get down to small, medium enterprises, smaller businesses, this becomes more complex, but you have to start somewhere. If I try and capture everything of somebody who's been in the industry for 20 years, I'm not sure what I do with that information. Other than I've got a great repository of the fact that Joe or Joanne has done fantastic things. Now if I want to reshape them for what I want the organization to do, I would strongly recommend that you start simple. So if I have this a unit measure, and I think we've got a Q&A afterwards, so you can challenge me on whether you think this makes sense or not. What we then did was to break this down again. So remember those blocks on the left-hand side. I'd like people to think of themselves as for those two, the technical and the competency side. I'm a project manager, program, I'm in that area. I'm in governance and quality, business analysis and consulting, architecture and design, development and analysis, test and integration, and delivery. And you'll notice this kind of had a flow of how projects and programs go. And many people will be in this for their whole life. That is their career level. Now, we created this with Pete at Norwich Union. So we started to look at the desire to build professions behind this. Because I also personally believe that where this actually sticks and adds most value is where you engage with the professionals themselves to build their own career paths, their own development paths, and you engage in them. I think that learning and development have a massive role to provide the structure and enable that to happen. But I really believe for this to stick, people have to buy into this, and it has to grow and evolve. This is quite a challenge for lots of organizations who believe, no, people should be told how that's going to work. I still think to make things work and keep it simple, you engage with people. And one of the challenges is to stop engineers over-engineering things, is to remind them that we're not going to do anything unless we use it. So the mantra I had is, I will not do a skills assessment unless you tell me what you're going to do with the information. I'm not going to do a resource plan unless you tell me what you're going to do with it. Because I think we owe all of the professionals, when we put them through some of the pain of this, to actually demonstrate to them how we're going to use the information, why it's good for the business, and why it's good for them. So if I just flip back, if we agree that something like that is a breakdown, the only things I actually want to measure now to start with, I would ignore these to start with, is start on the left-hand side using these factors. And by the way, for each of these, we use probably no more than 8 or 9 SFIA skills with each of those. So we went through and started to cherry pick those things. And when I say we did this with the professionals. So we found champions in the organization, the architects, the service delivery people that were viewed positively by the rest of their community, but also were keen to get engaged in this. And we built the skills profile as simple as possible. And the challenge was we set a target of 8, I think it was 6 at one point, and we had more arguments about if you wanted this added in, what would you drop out, until you proved to yourself that you really, really needed 9 because you were going to use it for something. With this information, I wanted to start to build a training curriculum that matched to those skills. So if the business could tell me what they needed in level terms, and I could see what I had in capability, what I would then like is the learning and development people to build the right curriculum to help me plug the gap. And that wasn't just built on the fact that you went on a course or you went online. I needed projects and programs to allow those people to come through, be mentored by more senior, experienced people to achieve the same outcome. The point I'm going to keep stressing is I built it all around SFIA. And the reason that we built it around SFIA is I have seen nothing that is better than SFIA for doing this. And we will keep a focus on SFIA to keep this as tight as possible. And now I hope you start to understand why I really want a SFIA Lite, which is what's the smallest number that I actually start on. And maybe the answer is getting different people, different companies' views of what subsets did they use. If I'm going to add to SFIA, tell me what I'm going to use that for, not because it would be nice to have. So, if we use the structure, I can have a senior IT architect in resale, point of sale, NCR. If I'm going to move from NCR to something else, I have a potential cultural problem. Pete probably won't remember me saying we had at Norwich Union some people written into their contracts specific languages, code languages, which is a really interesting thing to do. I'd actually like to avoid that, because it means that when that atrophies and I no longer want to be in that, I want people with a mindset which says, my real role is here. The other things may change depending on business need, and I will move with you on that journey. And Norwich Union had quite a challenge with some of the people who said, no. This is what we do. It's in my contract. That's what I do. Now, if I make a strategic decision that I'm going to go and outsource that to India and I don't want to do that function in-house anymore, then I need people prepared to go with me. So I need people to start to think of themselves in these terms and be flexible, that some of these things may need to change for good business reasons, but that's good for my career. It gives me variety. And I have one common language that I can share with my project manager, I can share with my manager, which starts to define what my aspirations are in a unit of measurement that is also used by the business for how they want to build capability. Where do they want to see capability? And also, if I want to make a strategic decision in these areas, very quickly to look at what is the cost consequence of doing that. When IBM started to stop doing things in COBOL, and in year 2000, it had thousands of people who now had very strong COBOL skills and the very old skills. And they went through a massive retraining program to get people to the C++ and the more modern languages. Not everybody wanted to make that move, but it recognised that we were heading towards a cliff. After year 2000, we needed to actually start to retrain people, so we had boot camps. Again, you needed some foresight to say, what is happening here, and I'm not heading towards a cliff, or do I really want to get rid of people and actually have to hire in new ones again? Again, we've got a junior application developer, retail banking, object-oriented, and C++. It's something tangible that I can plan for. It says that as an individual, maybe if I'm in control of my own career, I ought to start thinking about how I'm going to move forward. What do I want to do with my career? What do I see? I should be reliant on the business telling me what opportunity is coming on the base of projects or programs or service delivery in a term that I can understand that relates to my career, to my development. I also passionately believe that we need to get individuals driving their career and not organizations doing it to them. And that I owe them the right to speak in a language that they understand. I think when we go out to contract agencies, we should be using our language, and the contract agencies should have to fall in line with that. I've made the plea over about 5-10 years now, please government, adopt this. I know you use SFIA. Please mandate it with all of your suppliers, because it would probably be the fastest adoption of a common language that we have in the industry, and I understand why that may be difficult to achieve. So, really what I'm saying, what I hope you support, is that we need a common language, common unit of currency. So, architects between myself and Lotus, I was using the same English language. It didn't mean the same things. We need it to be consistent, because what I will show on the very final slide is it is all about people. I have a really strong bias on it's about people. Have one set of overall processes that you actually execute, and they are done by, tends to be all of these people. So finance, normally tell you what your budget is, you divide by the average salary, and it gives you a number of bodies. How do I start to transfer that into, I don't just need bodies, I need people of the right shape to do the right kind of work. I need operations, I need IT, I need the HR function, and I need people themselves to start to think of themselves as an IT architect, as a service delivery professional first, with those other attributes, so that I can start to use that language when I talk to them. When I talk to the people in BP, gradually people called themselves and were proud to be an architect. They were proud to be a program manager. And then they told me about the other things. I still had some people, and as SAP came up most because people, I was a SAP coder, I was a SAP architect, it means you're expendable pretty much if the company doesn't stay with SAP. I still think that the best is SFIA as the foundation for that language and currency, but it needs structuring. We fought long and hard that SFIA shouldn't become everything to everybody. I still think that you need that subdivision, otherwise it is still too big. And I believe that this will enable long-term consistency and sustainability of all people recruitment, development, and deployment decisions. So my message is keep it simple, base it on SFIA, and just execute what you have, and don't measure or do anything unless you understand what you're going to do as a consequence of what you measured. So I have somebody waiting in the wings, which means I'm definitely at the end. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much. Now we can take some questions before break. Questions for Alan or Ron, please. We've got a couple of microphones. There's a gentleman at the back there. Paul, if you can run.
See what the question is. Hi, Tom McEwen, Edinburgh Napier University. A question for Alan. It was quite interesting to look at your model and compare that to various parts of my past. The one thing you didn't mention is, what do you do with a new skill when it comes along, one that isn't currently in the framework? This afternoon I'll be talking about user experience and some of the things that happened there. So do you build that, do you find the least bad in the current framework, or do you use other frameworks?
Those microphones are working, Alan, if you want to. Yeah.
No, I think one thing I didn't mention, and I should have done, was that whatever you've got, if this framework and the content was still the same 2 years later, you've probably failed. So again, get the professionals involved on an annual basis to go through this. And to your point, are there new skills that are coming in? Now, what you are actually raising is a really interesting point. If I have this shell, maybe SFIA isn't on its own sufficient. So I looked on the left-hand side, the competency, and maybe there are some other things. And we were talking this morning, I think what you're getting to the hub of, so what should come into SFIA next? But I think what was important was you can add, but as a principle, you must drop one out, unless after half a day of really arguing, you need both, because I understand why I need it from a business perspective, keep it in. What was good, keep it fresh, constantly keep reviewing it, do it the professionals, try and keep it small unless there's a compelling business reason, and if there is, go with it. Absolutely.
So a bit like my wife's closet.
Yeah, I'm sure she throws out in equal numbers to coming new stuff.
Yeah, right. Margaret, over there, please, Paul.
Thank you. Margaret Ross, Southampton Solent University. I'm very interested in the idea of the SFIA Light. I wonder if you could expand on it, and I would wonder then if you could comment on it from the Foundation's point of view. Thank you.
Do you want me to start, Ron? Because then I can really drop you in it, can't I?
Go on then, yeah. I'll tense myself.
This was really, I mean, what I had in mind was effectively what we worked with other customers or clients. I never got used to calling people clients, but I really must try harder. Was if I took the content of this subdivision of SFIA, that effectively was my SFIA Light. So forget whether I've got the right orientation. What are the key high-level roles in an IT function? What are the minimum number of skills? And I'm suggesting that they are not they are a subset of the current SFIA, which allows you the transition to the earlier point. I can add things as required, but let's just make it easier for people. Let's get more prescriptive, which just says our recommendation is you start with these 40 skills across your organization with some standard competencies. Start from there. And after a couple of years of building that into resource planning and development, start to add some more things. And where I'd really love this to go is the SFIA community starts to bring their learning together, which just says, yes, we started there, and these were the things that we added. And this is where we found out we were measuring the skill, and we never really did anything with it, so I dropped it. But give you a skill scan down. So if it was, what are we at, 200 skills? Is it 200?
Yes.
200.
Yeah.
Let's start with
No,
60.
more.
100, but don't rewrite
100,
them, don't
100.
amalgamate them if you can. Start from there, and then we will build out. So
Yeah.
I have a starter set, which we used at Norwich Union, we used at BP. It may be a starting point or not. It's probably old because it was based on version 3 and things have evolved, but let's start with the stuff. Where it's leading you is towards profiles, not just pure skills. So just for people who are starting out on this, give them some structure to start with. Start to measure your skills, build your development, and add to it based on business need, not just because you can.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, good. Well, let's start here. I remember when I was a programmer, we had 144 instructions in our instruction set. And I never wrote a program that contained all of those, and I don't believe anybody else ever did either, except the post office, of course. And some of you know what that means. But anyway, so everybody uses SFIA Light because there's the framework with 100 skills in it, and you use what you need to define the roles and so on in your organisation, and you haven't used all of those skills. I think the issue here is that if you're a large, sophisticated organisation who's thought quite deeply about IT people and their skills, which tends to be the case in IT companies and some other organisations, then it's no problem for you to make that journey. But if you're quite a small organisation, an SME, you don't really want to see this 100 skills. You think, oh, what do I do now? So what I think I'm interpreting this as meaning is you really want somebody else to make that selection for you and say, look, these are the ones you probably need. And so SFIA Light becomes a way of getting at SFIA, and I'm thoroughly in agreement with it, and it's on my list of things to consider and talk through with our board, and I would imagine something like this is going to emerge, and I think it's a really great idea. If I just add one other thing, I've been in IT for a tremendously long time, as I suggested to you with my earlier remarks. I don't believe there are any new skills. I believe there are new ways of describing old skills, and I think there are old skills applied to new technologies. So you do get things in SFIA which, one or two, offend me slightly, like, web design, that kind of stuff. And I think you mean system designer, do you? Or do you mean content developer, and so on. But they're legitimate new ways of describing these things. That's how people work. You can't walk down the high street saying there's no such thing as a web designer. They'd kill you because they know there are such things. So, I think that's what we mean by new skills. And when you're getting into this in depth and you are separating out, well, we've got skills and we've got knowledge and we've got experience, then it all becomes a lot simpler. But yes. I believe we do need to have new things in SFIA from time to time. We've probably reached the stage where we should start chucking things out when we put new things in, and a SFIA Lite's a great idea.
Thank you. We've got, just very quickly, one more question, please,
Peter's
and a very
up,
quick answer. And I think the gentleman next to Margaret was first. Sorry.
Hi, it's Peter Leather here. I guess just to follow on what both Ron and Alan said there, I think the SFIA Lite concept, I think you can get it very quickly if you keep things simple. I ran a workshop with a supermarket just a few weeks ago, and within half a day you can get to the organisation's view of what the SFIA skills are important to them. And I think within SFIA, the SFIA Lite is there. It's probably just hidden a bit, and there are some skills which are definitely parent skills of others, and I think we probably just need to do a bit of work to isolate those and highlight that to users. And I think you're right, it's the smaller organisations who have, by nature, people who need to be multi-skilled, and it can be very overwhelming trying to plough through the whole of SFIA and matching skills to people. So I think it's an initiative worth exploring.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gents. It's just turned 11 o'clock. Can we be back in here, please, for the next session at exactly 11:30? Thank you very much.